Daf Mem Vav Amud Bet. Just to give you a roadmap of where we've been and where we are going. We're talking about the border between the end of the seventh day of Sukkot and the arrival of the day we all call Shmini Atzeret, which is, as we learn each year actually, on Shmini Atzeret, differentiated from Sukkot in various ways. It is considered halachically essentially a separate and distinct Yom Tov. The mitzvah of Sukkah is only 7 days. The mitzvah of Lulav and Etrog, 7 days. And that second sentence that I just said is only 7 days in the Makom HaMikdash. The question is, what happens with the 8th day? Where we went last time, which we'll review again now, is the Gemara in Masechet Sukkah, Daf Mem Vav, at the top, where we had seen that the Gemara was trying to understand what happens on day 7 when you're done with the mitzvah of the Daled Minim. You're finished with its use for a mitzvah. Can you now take the objects and use them for your personal use? I'm multitasking because I remembered I didn't move the source sheet packet that I'm going to give out here onto the screen. So I got to do that while I'm talking. Forgive me. Not like sending emails or something. Is the moment that you finish using the mitzvah object mean that it no longer has its Kedushat mitzvah? Or does it retain the Kedushat mitzvah at least until the end of the day? That's what we saw last week, and we'll review that presently. The rest of the 7th day.
Correct.
What we will also see, however, tonight is, what is his potential status on the 8th day? Now, why do we care about the 8th day? Forget Chutz La'aretz. This is only in Eretz Yisrael. We will come to deal with the Chutz La'aretz question toward the bottom of this page. I hope we get there sooner rather than later. But before that, we're going to deal with the reality of what happens when the 7th day has a span of time where it overlaps with the 8th day. Bein Hashemashot. And we have a general principle that says, and we have at the beginning of Sukkot as well, something that has become muktzah, or that is muktzah for a purpose, or set aside, that's what the muktzah means, with the onset of a day, at the Bein Hashemashot of that day, means there's going to be a carryover of that status into the subsequent day. So Bein Hashemashot is from sunset until stars out. If in that period of time something is forbidden from use because it's muktzah, then that status really carries over to the next day. Even if there isn't actually a mitzvah left on that day, but because there's a vestige, there's the point of the overlap, the meshing of the 2 days, day 7 and day 8, maybe the fact that when the sun sets on day 7, and yet it's not the stars out, so we can formally call it day 8, perhaps there's still some vestige of the Kedusha of mitzvah that obtains throughout that period, which means that since it's gone over the bridge into the new day, maybe it will include the new day. I've just articulated an opinion which is not what we saw last time. We saw the two views, Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. Reish Lakish, you finish the mitzvah, use it for whatever you like. Rabbi Yochanan, when you finish the mitzvah, the rest of that day, day 7. But tonight we will also see shortly the opinion of Levi. Rabbi Levi holds, Rabbi Levi, more appropriately, holds that it is, since it made it over the bridge into the Bein Hashemashot, all of the 8th day, it's also prohibited.
So, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, Mark first.
Okay, the second opinion that follows Bein Hashemashot is prohibited.
Right.
Or you didn't say that. You said until the end of the day.
Right.
So where would that fall in that opinion? Is it Seisach Ohavim, or is it?
That's going to be part of our question.
Okay, it wasn't answered in
No, what I just said, it was not answered. It seemed to be that to the end of the 7th day means until sunset.
Okay.
Sounds like it.
For right now, that's
a working assumption.
I just wanted to take it. So, okay, it's now Hoshana Rabbah's today.
Yeah.
I have my Lulav, my Etrog, my whatever it is.
Yep.
It's now I'm getting ready for Shmini Atzeret. It's going into Shmini Atzeret.
Right.
It's nightfall. It's Shmini Atzeret. The next day, the Lulav or that night, the Lulav and the Etrog are muksa.
Well,
According to what you were.
okay, that's the third opinion. So again, there are 3 opinions here. The three opinions are, this is only for Eretz Yisrael. Forget Chutz La'aretz for a minute, because that's going to add another monkey wrench.
Yeah, I'm talking about Eretz Yisrael.
So we had Reish Lakish. I'm doing it in out of order of the Gemara, but Reish Lakish, I flip Reish Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan. Reish Lakish holds as soon as you finish using it, after Shachris, and Musaf, etc., you can do whatever you want. Make the jelly, eat it, it's fine.
Right.
Rabbi Yochanan says, well, it carries through to the end of the day. He doesn't specify if carry through to the end of the day means till sunset or whether it means till the stars are out. He doesn't actually say.
No.
But Levi then comes along
Says the next day.
and says, oh, it's not just the seventh day, it's even the next day. You know why? Because the reality is that there is an overlap between day 7 and day 8. And we have a principle that migudei katsoi bein Hashemashot, it katsoi lekula yoma. If something is muktzah at the Bein Hashemashot going into a day, then it carries it over and extends throughout the rest of the day. There's actually a relationship in a certain way between Rabbi Yochanan and Levi, right? They both want to extend the muktzah status of an object, which you can't eat it, can't derive benefit from it, beyond its usage for the mitzvah, by dint of the fact that it's still somehow connected to the kedusha of the time period that came before.
You actually have one dividing line, right? Extension or non-extension, and then within extension, you have two separate.
Correct.
Just a
Correct.
short time and then the whole.
Correct. And Reish Lakish on the face of it makes a lot of sense. Reish Lakish says, I finished doing the mitzvah. It's like, why do I still have kedusha? No, Rabbi Yochanan says, up to the end of the day. Rabbi Levi says, the end of the day, yeah, but that includes Bein Hashemashot, which means it's the next day as well. Larry had a question. I'll go to him next. And Ira still want to say something? And Eddie? Okay, hold on. And Benny, hold on. So Larry first. Larry's waiting patiently. Go ahead. I don't hear you, Larry. So something's wrong maybe with your system? We heard everyone before. No, I even heard Larry before. No, he's unmuted. It says I can mute him if I want, but he's unmuted. Larry, I'm sorry, we don't hear you. Try to fix with your system, and we'll go around the table. Eddie, please.
So, Rabbi Yochanan, part of the reason for that, it might be extending, but it's really not, because someone else could come along in that day and still use it for the mitzvah, because it's not, the day isn't over.
Okay, so that would be another factor, right? Rabbi Yochanan points out, wait, could it still be used for a mitzvah by someone? That's Eddie's point.
So that's what
Right?
I was trying to get to, because I said today's Hoshana Rabbah,
Right.
and I said today, in the afternoon when I'm getting ready, but at that point.
It's still
not.
right. You could still use it for a mitzvah. Not you, because you discharged your mitzvah. Remember, it's a discrete thing, but someone else.
Didn't perform the mitzvah.
Okay.
Could they perform the mitzvah?
Yes, it could be used by someone else, right?
Right.
So Eddie's point, Eddie, and now Ira, they're both together with this. The fact that someone else could use it means it still has utility as a Dvar mitzvah. The next day, there's nothing. We have to sort of understand what is Levi driving at. I explained to you sort of the logic, but obviously it's disputed because what do you mean the next day? It's not, and the 8th day, forget Chutz La'aretz, just in Eretz Yisrael. Nobody holds on the 8th day there's a mitzvah taking the Lulav. Right?
Right.
The Shivat Yamim, it's not 8 days, 7 days.
Right.
Follow? So that's puzzling. It's hard for us to understand.
Exactly.
We lost Larry completely. He's hung up. I hope not in a fit of rage. I hope he'll be back. Okay. The technology gets you every time. Okay, Benny, please.
But we
And then
already know in the Mishnah that once the mitzvah was done on the 7th day, the Lulav and Esrog, right?
Yep.
The children used to grab it,
Oh,
and therefore
good.
its mitzvah was done. It's no longer muksa. it's
Excellent.
nothing.
Did you hear that on the phone? Benny pointed out that we learned in the Mishnah that already after the mitzvah was done, I'm just repeating his words, the children would grab it, would play with it, would use it, etc., which seems to say very strongly, once you're done with the mitzvah, it's over. So I'll remind you, that is exactly why we're having this conversation on Daf Memvav Amud Bet, where the title of the conversation is a brief quotation from the Mishnah, because both Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish will use that as a proof text to try to prove their point. And very obviously, Reish Lakish will say to Rabbi Yochanan, just to play it on your side first, because you're taking sort of Reish Lakish's position, well, if people are playing with it, clearly it's permissible after you've done the mitzvah. Someone else could use it for a Dvar mitzvah, but they're not. It's mine. So I don't have to keep it. If someone else came along, they could use it, but I'm not locked in just because there could be someone who knocks on my door at 4:59 and sunset is 5:00 and says, can I take your lulav and etrog and make a bracha on it? I don't have to wait for that. I did my mitzvah with my mitzvah object and it's mine. And how do I know? The kids played with it. You know what Rabbi Yochanan said back to him? Rabbi Yochanan said back to him? The grown-ups don't do that.
Right.
Only the children do that. And if only the children do that, Rabbi Yochanan says to him, then obviously the grown-ups are not allowed to do that. That's why I specify children, because grown-ups are not allowed. says Rabbi Yochanan to Reish Lakish. See, that just proves my point. That for the rest of the day, the grown-ups cannot use the lulav and etrog. To which Reish Lakish retorts, when the Mishnah used the language of tinokot, it didn't mean literally only the tinokot. Lishna de urcha nakat milta. That's the Gemara. The Mishnah spoke in the way that people speak. Typically, parents don't do that. They don't play games with their lulav and etrog. But if they wanted to, they could. They just don't. So that's actually functionally how it goes. But the grown-ups could. And of course, Rabbi Yochanan is saying, yeah, well, it is deliberate. That's what the language was used. By the way, I actually said it. We said it a little bit backwards. That's the Ika de Amre. That's like the side Reish Lakish could use to attack Rabbi Yochanan. First, Rabbi Yochanan attacks Reish Lakish, if you will, right? And we'll see. We can see it in the inside the Gemara itself, right? That's right here. Mem Vav Amud Bet. I'm 5 lines down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines, 6 lines down. Sorry. The 2 words are miyad tinokot. I'll remind you also, we had a conversation. I'm on 646b. The first word on the line is tishma. There's 2 lines there with tishma. So the second word after the colon, miyad tinokot v'chulei. I'll just remind you, Larry, I see your hand again, and Art's waiting patiently. So give me 1 minute, because now Art got in the queue while you were getting dialed back in. That there were 2 approaches to understanding what miyad tinokot, shomtin. According to Rashi, they grab it from their hand. Who grabs it from their hand? The grown-ups.
Right.
So it is the grown-ups who use it. Isn't that proving Reish Lakish's point? Yeah. Okay. But according to Tosfot and one opinion in Rashi that we have on our page, it means that immediately, not miyad doesn't mean from the hand of, but miyad la'alter, immediately. Right. The children do this. Remember? That was the 2 views we saw. That's already on the Mishnah. Yeah. So we have Rabbi Yochanan saying, etrog, right here. I'm Rabbi Yochanan, etrog b'shvi aser b'shmini mutter. And then Sukka, afilu b'shmini asura. We'll come back to that later tonight if we have time. That's tonight's subject. This is all sort of just fast, sort of cementing what we already learned. Reish Lakish amar etrog afilu b'shvi nami mutter. Right? Even the 7th day, you can use the etrog right after you finished discharging the mitzvah. But my kamiflige, what are they arguing about? Marsav mitzvah itkatzai. Reish Lakish holds it's only for the purpose of the mitzvah that it was muktzah. But umar savar lekuli yoma itkatzai. It's for the whole day that it's going to be muktzah. Eitvei Reish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan. Reish Lakish asks Rabbi Yochanan as follows: Miyad tinokot shomtin ulavehen va'ochlin atrogehen. See what the kids are doing, the children are doing. My love, hu adin legedolim. That must also be what the adults get to do. It just happened to mention kids. Lo, says Rabbi Yochanan. Back of the Gemara says for Rabbi Yochanan, tinokot dafka. When it said tinokot, it's because only the children. But some read the story backwards, and rather, Eitvei Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan says Reish Lakish, Miyad tinokot shomtin ulevein va'ochlin etrogeyen, tinokot in gedolim lo. Right? For children, yes, but grown-ups, no. Hu hadin da'afilu gedolim. So he answered Reish Lakish's side. So it answered no. It mentioned children, but it really meant gedolim as well. V'hai dekatane tinokot urcha de milta katane. That's just how the Mishnah likes to speak, because that's generally how it goes. But don't think that it means just the children. Anybody could. So each of them, in other words, marshaled the Mishnah to support their point. And it kind of turns on the word tinokot. Do you mean actually literally just the kids and not the gedolim, because the gedolim have to wait till the end of the day? Or the kids, but it could mean the adults as well. Okay, first Art and then Larry. Art, go ahead.
From Yochanan's argument is that it's going to be muktzah as long as somebody can use it. Then the question becomes, if somebody has not done the Lulav and it already got to be Bein Hashemashot, is he still allowed to do it at that point? That seems relevant to the argument.
Right. So let me just repeat what Art said. I'm adding the word if, but if we hold like Rabbi Yochanan, and if Rabbi Yochanan maintains that the reason why we don't use the etrog and the lulav for the rest of the 7th day, even after the mitzvah, is because someone else might come along, then what if that someone else comes along after sunset, but before Tzedek Kochavim, i.e. during Bein Hashemashot? Would they perform the mitzvah or would they not? Right. Now, that's an assumption, though, that I took as a given in this problem, which is, why does the status for Rabbi Yochanan retain its muktzah status, huktzah l'mitzvato, to the end of the day? We added in the language because someone else might happen along. But it's not clear that that is Rabbi Yochanan's view. He might just hold, as a matter of halacha that if something is muktzah when the holiday begins, it remains muktzah the whole time.
It would only be muktzah when the holiday begins, at least according to the svara that we had up till now.
Right.
It would only be muktzah if somebody can do the mitzvah.
Or retain. Okay, so to play it out a little further, and some of the Rishonim do discuss this, the issue is that when it's Bein Hashemashot, now it's a suffix if it's Shvi or Shmini. That's what Bein Hashemashot means. We don't know if it's the 7th or the 8th. It's sort of like a little of both. So the part that it's the 7th, it's the 7th. But the part that's the 8th, you can't make a bracha on it. And is there a Baal Tosif problem? And is it a mitzvah de oraita to take the lulav of the etrog on the 7th day? Not unless you're in the Beit HaMikdash. Yeah. So if you're in the Beit HaMikdash, then you can make this argument. If you're in the Beit HaMikdash, that's the Ritva makes this point. And he says in the name of Acherim that essentially people may happen along who have not yet accomplished the mitzvah of lulav. It's Bein Hashemashot on day 7 going into day 8. You're in the Beit HaMikdash. It's still a mitzvah to oraita for all 7 days. Suffix to oraita l'chumra. Therefore, they perform the mitzvah. And according to some, they'll make the bracha as well. That's another discussion, which we won't get to tonight by the likes of how things are going, but that we were going to get there eventually. But I can't give everything away in one moment.
The question wouldn't necessarily be on the 7th day. I mean, the same question is, you didn't.
I know. Anytime. Yeah, right. Agreed. Okay, Larry, over to you, and then Ronnie.
Please move on.
Ronnie.
Very quickly, I was taught that when it comes to benching left for Yom Tov, you don't get the 20 minutes of Bein Hashemashos leeway. That when it says it's Yom Tov, you light and it's Yom Tov. For Shabbos, you can play around a little bit because of the 20 minutes, but Yom Tov is much more strict.
Well, there's a discussion about whether there is Tosefet Shabbat, whether there is Tosefet Yom Tov. Don't forget, if we're going from day 1 to day 2, that's certainly true because it has to be after Tzedek Kochavim. But there is something to what you're saying. I'm not going to admit that variable into the equation because it's throwing another whole layer about like who was Makabel the day and when, and was it early and does it count and not? But what we're talking about is the murky time between day 7 and day 8, where it's not clear which day it actually is. It's a little above.
But yeah, all that's
Follow?
fine. I think it all comes back to what you just said before, which is Rabbi Yochanan doesn't say why he holds to Bein Hashemashot.
He does not tell us.
Right, we're making a bunch of assumptions.
And Rabbi Yochanan does not tell us that
We're making a bunch of
information.
assumptions here that it has to do
For
with
sure.
the other thing, but for all we know, he holds that anything that's muktzah on day 1,
Right.
it retains its muktzadom until through Bein Hashemashot.
Right. Till the Bein Hashemashot. Correct.
And so we don't know. Right at this point, we have no rationale for that. We're just imposing our own thoughts.
Right. So we have to
Really matter.
we have to kind of understand a little more about the sugya to be able to get more of the pieces of the puzzle. Let's maybe make a little headway together and just a shot of the Gemara, and then we want to see Rashi, Tosfot, the Ritva. No. This is good. What you're saying is correct, but let's get our ducks in a row, so to speak, to understand what's going on. What? Well, we're going to try.
Get to Boca, so we
We gotta try to do it. Here we go. Okay, so what we've seen so far is Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. What the Gemara is going to do next, well, we might as well see it inside. So is Rav Papa. Amar le Rav Papa Abaye. Sorry, that's a good question. We're probably about 20 lines down. A third of the way down. The first word on the line is the katane tinokot urcha the milta katane. Yeah. Okay. So we're at Amar le. So now we're going to throw the next piece into the reaction. This whole discussion so far was about Lulav, Daled Minim. Now we're going to go and say, what about Sukka? And I'll remind you at the top of the page, we said that Rabbi Yochanan maintains that the etrog is usher on the 7th day. It's mutter on the 8th day. We don't have so much clarity yet about the Bein Hashemashot, about him. We'll come back to it. But Sukkah, even on the 8th day, in Israel, in Eretz Yisrael, on the 8th day, Sukkah is usher. You cannot take pieces from it. You cannot use it. You might remember last time we said you can't take pieces of it for various reasons since it's Yom Tov and you can't break things. So what are you talking about? So we said it means if the sukkah had fallen down a Chol Hamoed and you're like, I'm not going to build it again, don't think you just take the wood and throw it in the fire, right? So that's Sukkah fil b'shmini asura. And Reish Lakish, right? He doesn't seem to argue on that. So we want to know, wait, according to Reish Lakish and according to Rabbi Yochanan, both, like, why is there an extra day of Kedusha for the Sukkah where it's Muktzah? Why is that? On the 8th day in Eretz Yisrael, there's no mitzvah of Sukkah, right?
No.
Right.
Okay, so now, Amar le Rav Papa Abaye, li Rabbi Yochanan, Maishna Sukkah, Maishna Etrog. What's the difference between the Sukkah and the Etrog? What's the difference? Amar le, answered Abaye, Sukkah de Chazia, le Bein Hashemashot, de Trame le Seudata, boy le Metov begava, umechal begava. If a person was going to have, for some reason, a meal after sunset on the 7th day, going into the 8th day, they would still need to eat in a sukkah. Remember, the mitzvah of sukkah is a mitzvah deoraita all 7 days. Therefore, in the Bein Hashemashot period, even at the end of the 7th day, even if it's a suffix, it's still a suffix deoraita, l'chumra, you sit in the sukkah. Do you make a bracha in that? I'm not going there now. Don't ask me. I can't tell you. We don't have a piece of the puzzle. But you would have to eat your sukkah, your meal inside the sukkah, meaning everybody agrees that there's going to be an extension of the Kedusha from the 7th day into the 7th day, overlapping with the 8th day. Once we say that, now we're showing that the sukkah as a structure was muktzah in Bein Hashemashot. Umigo the itkatzai lebein hashemashot itkatzai lekula yoma. Since it was muktzah, that's a general principle. You can sort of like highlight that in your Gemara because it applies to Shabbat, to Yom Tov, different objects. If something is muktzah at Bein Hashemashot, it's muktzah for the rest of that day. But etrog, de lo chazi the Bein Hashemashot, this is an assumption of the Gemara, that etrog on Bein Hashemashot does not obtain. Not everyone's going to agree with that, but okay. Lo itkatzai the Bein Hashemashot, right? The assumption of Rashi and others is that the mitzvah was already done. Rashi writes, Mishi Yatza Bo Shacharit. The assumption is, again, not Ira's case, and other people brought up this idea, and someone's going to show up 5 minutes after sunset. Hey, I didn't take the lulav yet, because that would only really work in the Beit HaMikdash, etc. Right, what Art was asking. But what's really happening is, you did it in the morning. That's the assumption. That's why there's a machloket. Right? Reish Lakish doesn't say, if in the afternoon, someone came to you with your little voucher, you say, I'm really sorry, I did the mitzvah already. These objects that I have in my house, you can't touch them anymore. They're not useful. No, they could use them for the mitzvah. But if you wanted to make the jam, you could make the marmalade like right then and there. According to Rabbi Yochanan, it's waiting the whole day. And it could be because someone's going to show up, but it might not be. It might just be because it's a principle. Since it was Huksila Mitzvato when the 7th day started, it continues the whole 7th day. But here, our assumption in the Gemara is, and this is how Rashi at least learns it, not everyone will agree, is that after the 7th day has elapsed, now you did your mitzvah in the morning. So there's no mitzvah that continues to the Bein Hashemashot into the 8th day. You can't do the mitzvah again, right? You don't get extra credit for picking up the lulav the etrog a second or third time. The mitzvah in the sukkah is anytime during the day you want to have a meal. Bein Hashemashot, 7th to the 8th day, you'll have to sit in the sukkah. I'm sorry. So now it shows that there is a chiyuv of being in the sukkah, which is a mitzvah deoraita in all circumstances, all 7 days, right? Wherever you live, Timbuktu, right? Wherever, right? You live in Hawaii, wherever you live. Chicago, you're going to sit 7 days. And into the 8th day, still a mitzvah. So, but when it comes to etrog de lo chazi lebein hashemashot, lo itkatzai lebein hashemashot, v'lo itkatzai lekula yoma dishmini. So therefore, it does not retain its muktzah status for the 8th day, according to either of Reish Lakish or Rabbi Yochanan. Now we drop Rabbi Levi into the mix. He plunks in Rabbi Levi, the Levi Amar, not Rabbi Levi, just Levi. Levi Amar. The first word on the line is Dishmini. The next word is the new section. V'levi. Amar, etrog, afilu b'shmini asur. I think even the 8th day. That's quizzical. Why would he think that? That's what we have to try to answer. Why is that his opinion? Like, what's his svara? Yeah. He doesn't hold his mitzvah of etrog anywhere on the 8th day, so why don't you keep going? It's going to have to do with that Bein Hashemashot. So here we go. So the Gemara concludes by saying, Vavu de Shmuel Amar, Etrog b'shvi aser b'shmini mutter. That's Avodah Shmuel's position. 7th day, Etrog aser. 8th day, mutter. Kam Avodah Shmuel b'shitatei de Levi. But then Avodah Shmuel seems to have encountered the shita of Levi, and Kam Rabbi Zera b'shitatei de Avodah Shmuel. And Rabbi Zera picked up the shita of Avodah Shmuel, the new one, improved one. Now that he had learned Levi's idea, Amar Rabbi Zera etrog shnifsala aser la'ochla kol shiva. Right, an etrog that became puzzle, you may not eat it all 7 days. That's what he maintains, which is strange. What do you mean all 7 days? Why not? Right? Amar Rabbi Levi lolikne inish hoshana lianuka biyoma tava kama. My tama, the Yanuka, mikne kane, aknue lo mikne. So another limud from Rabbi Zera, which is sort of related, because related also to the Daled Minim. But by the by, don't give your bundle, your lulav bundle, they call it Hoshana, the whole bundle, don't give it over to a child on the first day of Yom Tov. You know why? Because children could acquire, but they cannot transfer out something. They can acquire, but they cannot execute a transfer of their property for their protection, etc. So then you wouldn't be able to get it back. If you can't get it back, you can't do the mitzvah. So you give it to a child, you better take care of that first. All right. So it explains, it will turn out, you will find the kanafik belulav. You're trying to do a mitzvah of lulav with a mitzvah lulav doesn't belong to you. So if you have small children, on the first day, you do the mitzvah first, then you let them do it. And that's that. Someone's trying to call me on WhatsApp while we're having a share. Sorry. Okay. They don't know. I don't know. Went on the desktop. V'amar Rabbi Zera. So a third teaching for Rabbi Zera, not related to Sukka per se, it's just Rabbi Zera. Lo lema inish lianuka di ahivna lach midei v'lo yaivle. Don't tell a child, I'm going to give you such and such, and then you don't give it to them. You know why? Mishum da'at ligmure shikra. You're going to teach them to lie. This is an incredibly true idea. Yeah. Among children, if you tell them you're going to get, if you say probably, it means yes. If you say yes, it means I promise and I swear and I vow. And if it doesn't come to be, it's like you're a liar. And they don't spare any expense in some cases. Not my true-faced children, but other people's true-faced children will just like give it right to you. You lied. I lie. I said yes, but circumstances changed. Well, I don't know what circumstances it might be. I have it right here that you vowed. But that's what Rabbi Zera is teaching. You're going to teach them. Seriously, you're going to teach them. They don't understand it. Shnamar, limdu lishonam daber sheker. Right? Teaching their mouth to speak lies. Yeah, to speak lies. Okay, so we'll pause here. We'll pause here for a minute to try to understand what just happened here with Levi. What did Levi say? Was he trying to argue? You have a question?
In the chart that I'm writing in my head.
Yeah.
Levi and
Rabbi Yochanan.
Avodah
Shmuel is with Levi.
I understand. So they're the
he just
same.
comes
They're
later.
like Ira and Eddie. So but they still say 7th day and 8th day, so they leave the Bein Hashemashot thing on the side.
They don't mention Bein Hashemashot.
Right, so we don't know what they hold in terms of the Bein Hashemashot thing.
Right.
So
they just think something about the 8th day.
Still be holding like Rabbi Yochanan.
Right.
We just don't know that yet, right?
We don't know that yet, but Rabbi Yochanan has already told us that on the 8th day you could use the etrog. And they say on the 8th day you can't use the etrog.
So when they say 8th day, and so when they say 7th day and 8th day, are we making the assumption that Bein Hashemashot is part of it or not?
They don't, right. So they don't directly say what their rationale is, which is why it leaves us in a lurch, because we can't understand why, according to anybody, would the period of time of the 8th day still be hooks l'mitzvato.
Right.
We just finished saying that the Bein Hashemashot from day 7 into day 8.
Except that you said we have a hook that if it's muksa during Bein Hashemashot, it's muksa for the whole day following.
Exactly. So
Right.
that's what they hold.
Yeah. So then would we assume that Levi and Shmuel don't hold Bein Hashemashot as muksa? Because if so, they would have to have held that it would be.
They do hold that the 8th day is usher. That's what Levi hold. The 8th day is usher.
They say it was muksa.
No, they say the 8th day is usher.
Okay, sorry.
Right? But your question is an apt one where you're not sure what's with Rabbi Yochanan.
Right.
What does he hold in the Bein Hashemashot? You follow?
Okay.
Now, if you look at Rashi, he elucidates this very much. I am 3/4 of the way down the page in Rashi. If you look at Etrog lo chazi lebein hashmashot mishi yatsa b'shachrit Then you have a Rashi right after that. Etrog afilu b'shmini asura. It's probably 3/4 of the way down the page.
Yes.
Etrog afilu b'shmini asura. That's Levi's opinion. And Rashi explains Levi's opinion. Migo de asira bein hashmashot de shmini, since it was forbidden during the bein hashmashot of the 8th day. Mishum de bein hashmashot safek yom hu, because it might be really the 7th day still. Uveshvi it katsoy lekula yoma. And the 7th day, he builds off of Rabbi Yochanan. It's the whole day. It came into Bein Hashmashot Asura, and since the Bein Hashmashot is forbidden, the Af al Gav de Lochazia le Bein Hashmashot Asur lekuli Yoma. Even though you couldn't really perform the mitzvah, Levi admits, you couldn't really perform the mitzvah of Lulav on the Bein Hashmashot. It's too late. But we will say that it's still forbidden all day long. All right? So then Rabbi Zera had come along initially and seemed to disagree, but then when he encountered, Avuda Shmuel seemed to disagree. Sorry, but then along came Rabbi Zera and basically showed that Avuda Shmuel modified his opinion to match Rabbi Levi's opinion. He liked it better. Yeah. So we have here Rashi, Kamavua de Shmuel b'shitad de Levi, Chazar bo midvarav Amar Kilevi. He changed his mind. Kanav Yizeh b'shitad Avua de Shmuel, Amar Beit Midrash b'shvi Aser b'shmini Mutter. Right. So Rabbi Zera wanted to go back to the original opinion and say, no, well, really, he holds the other way. What Avua de Shmuel holds, not really so relevant for us for right now. We're just trying to get our heads around the other part of this. Once we have this in hand, at least a little bit, we're trying to understand it. If you look at, let's say, to figure out which Tosfot to do first, even though they're in a certain order, can we actually start with the
Right.
Yeah. So you have a question, Larry? Go ahead, please.
If this was covered, we can skip. We're saying the Bein Hashmashot is part of the 7th day, perhaps, and it's part of the 8th day, perhaps.
Yes.
So we have a suffix. So why don't we apply the suffix to both the 7th day and the 8th day?
Play it out for Lulav.
Well, yes.
Okay.
Well, for Lulav, for Sukka, I'm less sure because it's all 7 days.
That is exactly the distinction.
Okay, but for Etrog, for Lulav,
That's the discussion. Since it's no longer the 7th day, it's 7th day, maybe the 8th day, and since it's
but
reduced to
why
a
is
mitzvah
the-
Rabbanan,
I'm not clear on my
Do it.
question. Why isn't the suffix applied with equal force to both days? We seem to be saying, well, because the 7th day, Bein Hashmashot may be a continuation of the 7th day, therefore we have to be careful on the 7th day. Well,
not the 7th, the 8th day.
on the 8th day.
Yeah.
And then, so why don't we say, well, since the 8th, the Bein Hashmashot could also be the 8th day, then
You're off the hook on the 8th day because really it's the 8th day, not the 7th day, right?
right.
Right. So the
But
first thing you
then
said is
7th.
Levi. The second thing you said is Rabbi Yochanan. That's exactly right. The first thing you said is Levi. Levi says, well, that intermediate time between day 7 and day 8 might really be day 7. And since it might be day 7, then that means Bein Hashmashot, this object is still muktzah, huktzah mitzvato. And therefore, that we have a principle. The principle is once you have a toe into the new day, it's the whole thing. But then the second thing you said, that's Rabbi Yochanan. It's true that during the Bein Hashmashot, it might be still the 7th day, but we're not going to extend it into the whole 8th day because it was only an extension altogether from the time I finished my mitzvah in the morning till the end of the 7th day. What is the end of the 7th day? Sunset. Maybe it's stars coming out, but I'm not going to apply the whole principle of since it was muktzah when the 8th day, the 7th day to the 8th day period was happening. You know why? Because you can't really fulfill the mitzvah then anyway. Nobody holds there's enough oomph in a suffix that you're going to have to do it then unless you're in the Beit HaMikdash, which the assumption for most is that it's not in the Beit
We're
HaMikdash.
not following Rabbi Yochanan because mitzvah deraita l'chumra.
It's not a mitzvah d'oraita, lulav.
Ah,
But
okay.
it is. That's the distinction. That lulav lost its luster after day one.
Okay. So how does Rabbi Yochanan hold with connection with Sukkah?
How does Rabbi Yochanan with Sukkah? He holds that in the 8th day, you have to be concerned about Sukkah. Why? Because if the 7th day after sunset, before dusk, you wanted to eat a meal, you'd have to eat in the Sukkah. And because it's a suffix d'oraita l'chumra. And since you're going to do that, okay, so now the whole 8th day, it's going to be, right? We know that Rabbi Yochanan for sure holds of this principle of migod itkatzai bebein hashmashot itkatzai l'kula yoma. But it turns out, Rabbi Yochanan says, yeah, but I only apply it if really there's a chiyuv in bein hashmashot. And for the lulav, that you did in the morning on the 7th day, right? Normally, there's no mitzvah of lulav at night. Let's just say it plain. Any night, okay? It goes away. So if someone came running into shul at mincha and said to me, Rabbi, I never took the lulav theatric after mincha, and I'm looking at my watch like it's already after sunset, I tell them, listen, you can pick it up, but you can't make a bracha now. For sure, you can't make a bracha. Why? Because the chances are you're not really mekayim mitzvah. Because at night there's no such mitzvah. It's like interrupted, right? But if it's after sunset, 7th day, Hoshana Rabbah, going into the nighttime, they say, I'm starving and I'm a chola, I want to eat. You're in the sukkah. Well, I'm a chola, okay, so you don't have to eat in the sukkah. But let's hypothetically, they're not sick enough. And they say, oh, I want to eat in the sukkah. So go in the sukkah. But you can't eat outside of the sukkah, the meal. Why? Because it's between the time, and it's still the same mitzvah, which was a continuity from day one all the way till the end of day 7.
That was gonna be my question.
Yeah.
As I made my chart. is
Thank you for the review.
Difference between, is possible that the obligation is actually gone at Shachri, in most cases.
Which obligation? For the lulav.
For Lulav.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because you
So-
discharge your
so
obligation.
The assumption is that actually it doesn't necessarily, it ends pretty much when you do it, and it
Yeah.
doesn't recur.
Right.
Whereas for the eating the meal, that recurs if I had 7 meals that day.
Right.
As long as I was continuing eating, I was.
Right. Right. Which brings us to the thought experiment of the Bali Tosfot. The Bali Tosfot will now throw in the following thought experiment based on what Mark Pershan just brought up, which is the following. Unlike the Sukkah, which is a continuous 7-day-long mitzvah, the mitzvah of Daled Minim resets every day. D'oraita, the Rabbana, but resets every day. One of the Chachamim had a minhag, which I do not recommend and we do not practice today, but it was his minhag, and who am I to stand in his place, in his great place, a holy Jew. He liked to eat the etrog on Sukkot while he was using it. We learned about him. We learned about this on page 36b.
Yeah.
He would take a slice, like not a lot, but like a slice. He still had to have a shear of the etrog, but you would see at the bottom, he would scoop out a little bit every day. Why? Ani lo yodea. That's what he did. So the question is like this. If you hold huktzil mitzvato, when did he actually do this?
Yeah.
If it's huktzil mitzvato the whole day, then after you did the mitzvah that day, for the rest of the day, you can't scoop it out. It's kind of like, right? So when is he going to take parts of it? Okay. Now join with me. Tosfot, top of the page. Etrog b'shvi aser. Rashi just points. So Tosfot, top of the page. Mem vav medbet. Afilu la'achar shiyatzabo. Right. Even after your yotze. That's Rabbi Yochanan's position. Kosh mefarish lilakuli amayit katzai. Right. It says muktzah. Va'afilu reish lakish da'amar b'shvi mutter. Hainu lebatu denafik bay. Even according to Reish Lakish, it holds that you're allowed to cut it up, mash it, eat it on the 7th day. That's only after you did the mitzvah.
Right.
Stands to reason. Okay. Kidam rinan, lemitzvata it katsai. It was only made muktzah for the sake of the doing of the mitzvah with it. V'tema. But here's the question. Rabbi Chanina. What about Rabbi Chanina? The Amar Perak Lulav Hagazul. Remember that? The Matbil Bay Beresha. V'hadonafik Bay. You know what he would do? In the beginning of the day, it seems, before he did the mitzvah, he would slice off a little bit. The matbameh literally means he would dip it in a dip. Yeah, you can't eat your etrog, just with no dip. I mean, come on. So he had like a little whatever it was over there. He cut off a little bit, dipping. That's what this describes. Come on. Who does this follow? What? A little chumash, a little something, a little zatar. You put on. Delok Rabbi Yochanan, delok Reish Lakish. I'm in the narrow lines now, second to narrow lines. right? This isn't Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan holds the whole day will be muktzah, and it's certainly not even Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish thinks until you did the mitzvah, even on the seventh day. So what do you mean? In the morning, he would cut off a little piece, schnipzach, a little thing, so dipping, and he's taking the rest of the etrog in his hand. But again, this is lalach b'lamas. Huh? After they did the mitzvah.
Right.
After the mitzvah. In the case of Rabbi Chanitz, before he did the mitzvah. In the morning before he would take the lulav and the etrog, he would cut a little piece off the bottom of it. How could it be?
It's impossible.
Okay. V'yesh lomar, second line now, end of the second line in narrowed lines. V'yesh lomar kevin d'lo achal le kule u'mishayer b'kashir dematzi nafik be shari. Afilu Rabbi Yochanan. So explains Tosfot. Don't jump on me. Let's listen to what Tosfot has to say. That since he didn't eat the whole etrog, he was leaving enough of the etrog left, a shear, so that he could be yotze on that shear. So he would be yotze, even according to Rabbi Yochanan. Because apparently even Rabbi Yochanan holds it's huktzil mitzvato, means you have to have enough left. You could still do the mitzvah for the rest of the day. But if you cut off a little piece of it, it still would be okay. V'afal gav demimanav shach nesra kula b'yom rishon dechaser kol shu pasul. Even though the truth is, this thing with Rabbi Chanina, he did not do this on the first day of Sukkot. It's impossible, because on Sukkot, the psul of chaser is so stringent that even the tiniest little bit missing from any of its integrity, the whole thing's no good. So it must be days 2 through 7. Can't be day 1. Day 1, doraita, right? Rabbi Chanina does not live in the time in the mikdash, right? So Rabbi Chanina takes the etrog, or he's in time in the mikdash, but outside. He's in the gvulin. He has the etrog. First day, we're not talking about the first day. Day 2 through 7. So fine. So even though in the first day, so that would be true. Dilma Rabbi Chanina hifrish kul yom rishon u'miktzata l'shar hayamim. Maybe what Rabbi Yochanan did was he set aside the whole thing for the first day, which you'd have to do because that you need the whole lekicha tama, means also that the etrog is complete for the first day. But for the other days, he only made muktzah a portion, the portion that he needed from the top 3/4 of it, top 2/3 of it, that he would need to keep with integrity. Mida dehava a zayin etrogim l'shivat yamim d'lekama b'shmaitin. We're going to learn this case later. That since there's an interruption in the mitzvah of Lulav, so Sukka is one straight line, right? It's a long dash from day 1 to day 7. But Lulav is a staccato. It's the dots. Thank you. Stots. Doesn't happen at night. It's refreshed as a new mitzvah each day. I said in Bitzitutim, literally a new mitzvah, but it doesn't apply at night. So it turns back on every morning, right? So therefore, a person technically, we're going to see that case later on, not tonight, where a person could take 7 etrogim and say, every day I'm going to use 1. They want to use this one, and then use the next one, and the next one. So I have 7 beautiful etrogim for 7 days, which if you have an etrog tree in your backyard, you can do. If you're paying $75 a head, probably not. So it just depends, right? But that's what goes on. So what do you have over here, right? I have here 7 etrogim, and we're going to learn about it later. Vavgav ditanoi demahane besukko lo mahane ela beomer any bodamehen kol ben hashmashot. So even though when it comes to sukkah, we have a principle in sukkah that a person, as sukkah is starting, could say, I'm not separating myself from, let's say, the decorations in the sukkah. If you say that before sukkah starts, before the first night, then take, it remains yours. You could use the noise sukkah. You're hanging grapes. So before it comes in, you say, any bodel mehen, I will not separate myself from these items. I'm not making them part of the mitzvah. They're hanging in my sukkah, but they're not bottled to the walls of the sukkah or the schach of the sukkah. I want to reserve the right to use them. You could do that before sukkah starts. But you can't really do that with the lulav, because the lulav, actually, for the first day, you need the whole lulav. And you need the whole etrog. You can't say, I'm going to do the first top 3/4 of the etrog. That's for the mitzvah, and the bottom third or 3/4 or bottom quarter, I'm not being making designated for the mitzvah. You have to, right. So kidei to prepare maybe kadei yain and beitza the hacha b'yom rishon mimanavshach bodol mikulam. On the first day, whether you like it or not, you're separated. Means all of the whole daled minim, all 4 of them, the 4 of the species in totality become part of the huktzil mitzvato. So hamrin and hatam etrog the mafseke leilot miyamim kol chad v'chad ba'apei nafshe sukkah de lo mafseke leilot miyamim kula k'chad yoma arichta dame. So the answer is, yeah, as we said a moment ago, the etrog is staccato. The lulav the Sukkah rather, is a continuity all 7 days. He made the declaration that all of the 4 species, all parts of the 4 species, all 4 species that he had in his possession would be for the mitzvah on day 1. But came the night after day 1 into day 2, he said, for tomorrow morning, I'm only designating a portion of what I have here, not all of it. When it was going into the Bein Hashemashot, he said, you know what? I won't separate myself from the bottom, 1/8 of the etrog, so that I could have a little snack in the morning before I even do the mitzvah. Umiu kasha deleel perak lulav hagazul gali misha babaderech v'en b'yad lulav dekatani lichshayav leveto yitol al suchano. Didn't we have a case that a person who was traveling didn't have a daled meeting? They get home, there's daled meeting waiting for them on the table, and they want to eat their Yom Tov meal. What do they have to do? They have to take the daled meeting before they eat their Yom Tov meal. So mashma b'gemara the mafsik suudata b'shvil lulav v'kol shekain shlo yatchil, and obviously you can't start eating before you've taken the lulav in your hand. So im kain Rabbi Chanina hechi matbil ba bereisha. How is he starting off his day with a little fruit snack from the bottom of his etrog before he even does the mitzvah? How could that be? But tzarich lomar da'ari ka'amar. It must be matbil ba hayom v'nafik ba lemachar. It must be that he was doing the dip today from the bottom of the etrog, and then he was going to be yotze with whatever's left the next day. Follow? In other words, with the thought experiment, so to speak, it's not a thought experiments, what Rabbi Chanina was doing, they're trying to reconcile, how could we have that case with Rabbi Chanina where he's eating parts of the etrog? Isn't it always muktzah from the day before? When Bein Hashemashot happened, right? For the next day, automatically. So basically saying, yeah, he was yotze the mitzvah that day, and when the Bein Hashemashot was starting, when the mitzvah was about to get turned off for the nighttime, he said, yeah, okay, now I can take, in the Bein Hashemashot, I'm already taking the bottom of one. The next day, I'll have less of an etrog. It's a little shorter, but it's a new day. It's not the first day. It's the second day, third day,
So
fourth
is
day.
that the equivalent of messing with the Shabbos timer when the light is off and the electricity is not on? Meaning
It's not exactly equivalent, but it's a good analog, a good analogy.
There's it's not really a mitzvah, so it has no.
It's a good analogy.
It's a day, each day it's a different mitzvah. When it turns off, it mamash is off.
Yeah, it's a good analogy. I mean, it depends how the thing's constituted. You
No,
know,
I
you can't pull out
understand,
pins. You
but-
can just shift the thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just noticed the time also, and I have like the girls' bat mitzvah group coming to my house like now. So I expect to close here, but
Taste the etrog before we buy it.
yeah, you can take right.
Taste
Taste
testing.
that'll make everyone happy. Taste test your etrog before you buy it. You're not do not try that at home because it'll be chasser and that's puzzle. What we did not get to tonight, which we will get to, God willing, next week. Next week is a new week. And Mir Hashem is I want to understand better what is Levi doing. We'll say Tosfot Dibur Hamatchil Ad whatever it is. Dibur Hamatchil from Yud Amid Bet. I'll quote something from there. We'll see the Tosfot here. Dibur Hamatchil Etrog B'Shvi Aser we saw. We'll see the Yitrami Le Seudata. We'll look at the Ritva. We'll look at the Rav. All that and more next week. Adkan for tonight. Thanks for coming.